I'd like to call the meeting to order.
Oh, was that
Level
why,
County
David?
Commissioners, I'd
Okay.
like to invite everyone to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I talked to.
I'd like to start with a moment of silence and like everyone to remember the 18th anniversary of 9/11. On roll call, we'll start with Commissioner Culbertson.
Here.
Commissioner KAAZ. Mr. Smith's here. Commissioner Shimke.
Here.
And Commissioner Stevens. All commissioners are present. I'd like to open up the public comment portion of our meeting. Anyone from the public wishing to speak, please come forward, state your name.
Bill Trower. I'm here because of the Donahue Road, because it's my understanding when they called downstairs that they put off this road for one more year. They don't want to do it this year because they overbooked. So now we're waiting for another year, and by the time another year comes around, probably the thing, because it's changed 2 or 3 times since we first started this.
Well, it's in the hand of the contractors, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about it in administrative business.
Okay?
Because I'm not happy with it either,
Okay.
so.
Because we have school buses every day running up and down there, and it's so dusty that you just gotta stop. You can't drive through it because you get run over.
Well, we just gotta work this out with the contractor, because this board did everything we can do.
I know
We got it out on the street, it's in the
Signed the
hands of the
contract and the whole
contractor.
work, and they're,
So,
I tell you what they thought of them, but then that wouldn't be nice, so.
that probably would not be.
Say nothing.
There you go, Bill.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trower. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak? Then we'll close public comment and we'll move on to administrative business.
I think they had a few things they wanted to talk about.
Okay, I didn't know if there were others. Okay. Under administrative business, just each year we have trick-or-treaters that come into the courthouse, and then I think over to the Justice Center as well after that. And just wanted to let everybody know that's October 18th at 10 a.m. That'll be occurring this year. And we last year had a pretty good turnout, as we do most years, but probably 100 plus kids come through. So if y'all are interested in participating, we set something up down the dais downstairs, for the rotunda downstairs, with tables, and put candy out for the kids to come through. And that's all I had for administrative business today.
Mr. Van Perry, do you have anything? Where are we at on we had a property acquisition executive session a while back.
Commissioners, subsequent to your executive session in which you had the preliminary discussion of the possible acquisition of real property, a transaction has occurred which would allow the county to proceed to the presentation of a final proposal to this board. You had given some indication of the authorization limits Mr. Lawfrey and I would have to effect that closure, and just want to notify you it's our intention, unless you object, to proceed to that and try to have something presented to the board as soon as is practicable, certainly by next meeting.
Okay. And on Mr. Trower's deal, on Group 2 and 3 on our dust abatement projects, so they're officially dead for this year?
Groups 2, 3, and 7 were the projects that were yet to be finished this year. And given the notification by the utility company that they need at least 120 days, I don't see that there's any way that those will be completed with this construction cycle. One of the contractors has agreed to honor their price from this year, next year, with the construction season, and the other one we're still in discussions with. They asked for a very small increase, and we're trying to convince them that they could honor that price next year. So, but I do not believe that any of those projects will be completed this year, the remainder of them.
Well, what if we did a change order and went back to the asphalt base and asphalt surface mix? Because just about every contractor that comes before us has a change order.
Well, I think when we bid that out, those prices came in somewhere near $500,000 extra in cost, which is why we chose the alternate. And I would also, I'm not sure how good of an idea it would be to pave over the top of these utilities now that we know they're in the way, and not have them moved before we put asphalt down. Sooner or later, that's going to become a problem, and they're going to be tearing up our asphalt if we don't get them moved. So now that we know, I think it's probably best if we just move those utilities before we do the work.
Mark,
Go ahead, Jim.
oh, sorry. You and I had exchanged a few messages, and I think staff is already working on this probably to come in front of this board for review. But, helping to, one, better communicate with all of those property owners, the fact that we've got 12-plus miles of projects that won't be completed, explaining that because we've gone to a superior and or a better road type than what was the initial scope is what created this issue. And albeit doesn't make it any better, I think getting in front of it, explaining, again, scope change, the downstream impacts, the policy changes we've now made to make sure that that doesn't occur on future projects. All of those, as unfortunate as it is for this year's construction cycle, are positive changes going forward. But I think communicating it is our fault, here's what we're doing to address by replacing culverts, shaping roads, doing things that we can to be proactive as in regards to 2019, so that 2020 we have accelerated our construction cycle as much as possible.
I think you did a better job than I could do of explaining that, but it's absolutely correct. We originally started out these projects were going to be chip seal projects, and if you don't know the application, obviously it's just basically two thin layers of a oil base and gravel application, which doesn't require disturbing the surface at all. Then we changed to, some of them were going to be an asphalt, a 6-inch asphalt, I believe, overlay, which we completed some of those this year, and they came out, I think they did a very nice job on those, and they look good. But as a alternate, we came up with a plan where we do a concrete stabilization and then do a slightly reduced amount of asphalt over the top, which helps with the lip on the sides and also saved approximately $500,000 on the projects, to the best of my recollection. What happened in that process, though, was with the chip seal, we weren't doing any utility locations. We were just coming out and doing the application of chip seal, which we do in the county on a regular basis. In fact, annually, we put down chip seal applications with the county staff. So we didn't require the original designer to do utility locates, which is typical when you do road projects. With that, we left it at the responsibility of the contractors. Contractors aren't used to that probably because they haven't had to do that on other projects. So they waited until they were ready to come out and actually do the application to do a utility locates, and that's when we found out there in almost every case is phone lines, which we discussed last week is a policy that the county needs to really change, and that's to not allow these utilities to just go willy-nilly in our road surfaces. So, unfortunate, but it exists, and therefore I think it's best to get those utilities moved before we do this process to avoid future disturbances.
And we're getting a work session set up for that, right?
Yeah, we're working on that to get.
not allow this to happen with
Yeah,
utilities.
we're working on a policy a right-of-way policy basically that says you have to come and get a permit, we have to approve where it's located, so on, which the county doesn't have.
We have that, the permitting, but then when they go do it on the weekend when nobody's around, we're stuck with a phone line in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
And I think we will do our best to address all that.
Plowing through tubes and everything else.
But
They do.
we are working on that. We have that set up for, it will be a work session. There'll be a couple other items tied into that, but that's going to be coming forward. As Commissioner Shimke pointed out, I do think we need to notify the folks who live along these roads. We're going to send out a letter. What we were hoping is that we could get a more definitive timeline so we could put it in that letter. But regardless, wherever we are, by the end of this week, we intend to send out a letter to let folks know that the projects won't be completed this year, but they are still on slate for next year. This board, to my understanding, is fully intentional on finishing these projects and doing the next phases for next year as well, which we still believe we can get done. Originally, we thought we might have to delay 4 and 5 to get 2, 3, and 7 done, but it looks like we can probably get 4 and 5 done. In fact, there's some debate, and we're going to bring that to the board, not this week, but I'll go ahead and bring it up, about potentially adding 4 and 5 on as alternates to these, to 2, 3, and 7, to the vendors who were able to bid those contracts, and as an incentive for them to keep the pricing the same. And then that also allows us to tie in this year's pricing to next year's projects, which I think would be beneficial to the county.
You have a lot more faith in the utility company than I do. I dealt with them for a lot of years, and they don't move anything fast. Always been 18 months. I don't know where this 120 days is coming at, because
Well, that came from
207th
them.
Street was our last project. It took 18 months to get all the utilities out of the way.
And the 120 days, and it's not, I mean, we're not moving all the power lines and that, it's the.
Neither were
so-
they. We're talking just phone.
And that's what we've discovered so far, is it's the phone line that's primarily the problem. They gave us that time frame. I have to go with what they've told us so far. If that changes, I will absolutely let this board know if anything
I'll
changes.
bet we're here next year at this
But-
time talking about the same thing.
One of the things that, to keep in mind with it is they're not going to pull that line out of the ground and move it over 10 feet. They're just going to come and lay a new line in. So.
At their convenience.
Yeah, so that's a conversation we can have with the utility companies as well. And we do have Olson, who is our vendor now that we're using for consultation services for engineering. They have a utility coordinator who's going to be working with this. And so one of the things that we're going to discuss with them is the potential of where will there be conflicts? Are there going to be the potential, if they're going to come in and lay a new line anyways, where do we need to avoid, and can we work on the rest of it in the meantime? And our crews are on notice. They're out making or will be once they finish their projects, the chip seal projects they're working on right now. Once they get done with that, they're going to move on to working on all of these miles of projects for 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7. For putting in tubes and doing any prep work, so we'll be ready to go.
Can the coordinator with Olson, obviously, we've set the priority with 2, 3, and 7. Can we also add 4 and 5? I mean, let's not wait till
Have already done that.
next spring.
Yeah.
Might as well
to be
add
talking
all
about
of them
4 and
because
5
it's
utility
gonna take
locations.
road.
Right.
Yeah, we've already done that. We've already asked them to manage that,
Might as
so.
well do the next 10 years.
And I have a meeting,
Hey,
I have a meeting tomorrow with Olson and Lauren downstairs in Public Works to discuss that very thing, just to see where we're at and make sure we're all moving forward.
Do we have any legal remedy with the utilities to expedite the process?
So if they communicate 120 and it takes 122,
Yeah.
Well, Commissioners, certainly it never hurts to ask, and I believe continued attention is probably the most effective tool you have. These utilities are under the jurisdiction generally of the Kansas Corporation Commission, which you could avail yourself to communicate to them your displeasure if the delay becomes unreasonable. But I think if you impress upon the public utility that relocation is time is of the essence, that they'll work with you, and if they don't, then you have additional remedies. Certainly, with respect to any installation or relocation of public utilities or utilities in public right-of-ways, I think one of the most important things is for the installing entity to provide to you as-built plans prepared by a licensed engineer. That's, I think, the most critical missing element in all of this is we know we have utilities in your right-of-way. We don't know where they are. We don't know how deep they are, how far from the road they are, and I doubt if, quite frankly, the utility company knows that information after a period of time. So I think adding a requirement of as-built plans would be a starting point.
What I glean from that is they're going to do what they want, when they want, wherever they want. So,
I had another question on a different issue.
yes, sir.
For Mark, I wanted you to address, this is a question that's come up with some of my constituents on the sand pit issue as far as the traffic studies. We're now on the third rendition of traffic studies. We had a traffic study initially when the proposal was made, and then we had a follow-up traffic study that I think some of us thought it was a full traffic study, but it was a review of previous traffic studies, which didn't cover the exact route. And now we have a third traffic study that is proceeding forward now, and I received the scope of that traffic study, which is a thorough scope now. So the question is why that scope was not encompassed at the very beginning of the process, and going forward on other projects, do we now have a system in place where we're going to give the scope to developers in the future?
Sure, I can address that. First of all, I would say that the process worked the way it was designed to work, which is we required a traffic study, but it was for a route that was originally proposed that ended up not being the preferred route. That was the westerly route that was identified. So that's what the vendor originally reviewed. When we moved to the east route, there were fewer challenges with that route, we felt, at a staff level, and so the county engineer at the time reviewed that route and put forward any concerns that he had. When it came to the Planning and Zoning Commission, there were some other safety concerns that were identified, and so therefore we had another engineering firm review what had been done to that date to make sure if they identified any weaknesses or anything else that needed to be done. That was Wilson and Company. Wilson and Company reviewed the original review of the westerly route and the staff recommendation and the comments and concerns that were brought up during the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And they went out and reviewed the route itself, not doing a full traffic impact study on it, but just reviewing the route and identified a few other issues that they thought needed to be addressed. At that point, we made the recommendation that a thorough review of the easterly route be conducted. We had Olson and Associates on staff at that time. Previously, we had not. So they brought in their traffic expert to come up with a scope of what needed to be done to do a thorough evaluation of that route. They've completed that scope of services, or not, they're not services, but a scope of what they believe needs to be completed. We've passed that on to the applicant to have their traffic engineers complete that study. It's not a scope that we had previously created. I think when you have access to more resources like we do now that we're using Olson, they can bring a lot more horsepower to the task and come up with a lot better plan. The great thing is now we have that, and that's a scope that can be applied to any future development, and that we will utilize that as our baseline now. Whenever we require a traffic analysis, we're going to use that as the baseline as what we're expecting when they go do a thorough evaluation. I think when we talked about that, I had told you sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you find out you didn't know it. And that's kind of what happened here. Is the process worked, we had the reviews, and once we got the review that said, now you need a little more information, that's when we engaged Olson to come up with the specifications on what we're going to utilize going forward.
I just would have hated to make the decision on this whole thing based on that initial study. You know, if it had just, that could have been our baseline. I'm glad that the process has worked. It seems that, you know, we're now going to have a thorough study, but it does seem like the fact that Olson has come out with apparently in other jurisdictions they use for scope, that will be our standard going forward.
That is going to be our standard template going forward for what we would expect from a traffic impact analysis for developments like this that would have heavy truck traffic.
Anything else?
Yeah,
completely shift on the subject. I attended the United Way kickoff breakfast, and Leavenworth County is going to participate in the United Way campaign formally this year. The Safety Committee has volunteered graciously to lead that effort. So on Monday, October 23rd, Leavenworth County will kick off. September 23rd, thank you, Jen. We'll kick off our United Way campaign and visiting all the different departments. So just wanted to let everybody know that we're going to move forward, and Janet, myself, and the Safety Committee will make sure that we have a good United Way year this year.
Okay. All right, and thank you. All right, any more administrative business? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Jeff.
we have an opening in the Easton Township Board for a treasurer position,
Oh, okay.
and Stephanie Sloop has applied for that position. So
Okay.
I'd like to appoint her to be treasurer for Easton Township.
Okay, we got to put that on the agenda, though, or can we?
No, we don't always have to. I did advertise that
Okay.
as a public notice, asking for any applicants to come forward. That has been a 3-week, it's been advertised for 3 weeks. Stephanie is the only person that has applied for the
Okay.
position.
Okay. Then, I guess we'll entertain a motion to.
So I make a motion that we appoint Stephanie Sloop as treasurer for Easton Township Board.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the appointment? Voting?
Aye.
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 All right, anything else under administrative business? We'll move on to the consent agendas. Commissioners had a chance to look at everything on the consent agenda. Any questions, concerns? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
A motion is second. Any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
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 All right, and we'll move on. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn as the Board of Leavenworth County Commissioners and convene as the Board of County Canvassers.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
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 All right.
USD 464 had a mail ballot election on September 5th, 2019. We mailed out 6,657 ballots, of which 3,432 were returned and through the scanner. So that was over almost a 52% turnout, which
Wow.
was excellent. At noon, we did run the report, and it passed yes 1,759 to no 1,666. So there was a 93 vote difference. So that did pass, so we will move on, or the school district will move on with completing the bond issue then. So, does anyone have any questions?
Every vote counts.
Every vote counts. We were really, of course, we were super happy with the turnout, and out of the little over 6,600 that we mailed out, only 145 came back undeliverable, because Helen and the staff did a lot of work looking at addresses before we even before we even mailed them out, and so we were pretty happy with that, and we were happy with the turnout. So what I would need is just a motion to certify the mail ballot election for USD 464
Okay.
passing.
Consider a motion to accept the votes for the special mail-in ballot for the election on September 4, 2019 for 464.
So moved.
Second. Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
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 Okay. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn as the Board of County Canvassers and reconvene as the Board of Leavenworth County Commissioners.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Don't know who did, but any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right.
Should we take bets on which school's next?
Which school's next? Lansing? No.
They already
Yeah,
did
I-
theirs.
I have no idea. I have no idea. All right, we're ready for Public Works. Lauren, you out there? Yes.
Morning, Commissioners.
How are you today?
What I brought before you today is a request for a federal fund exchange. It's my understanding that we have done this several times in the
Yes.
last few years. And unfortunately, we are coming up quickly on the deadline. But I have been in communication with KDOT, and these requests are due on Sunday. So I am requesting that we approve exchanging the $364,739.21 of federal funds at a 90 cents to $1 exchange for $325,265.29 to be used as reimbursement for construction projects that we have already done this year.
Okay. Any commissioners have any questions on this, how all this works? Everybody familiar with this?
Probably a good deal, yeah.
Okay.
Lauren, my only question is, it just reminded me that we had that grant conversation, right? So it wasn't that long ago we had a grant, or a
Yes.
couple come in front of us that we approved.
Yes.
Do we have, or maybe this is already underway, I know I've discussed it internally briefly, but kind of a tracker of some sort, something that would tell us all the grants that we're eligible for, timelines to submit?
This is
keeping that
something
front and
that
center?
is definitely on the priorities of our department to try to start organizing and understanding what's coming our way, when it's due. I do have a webinar for KDOT grants, the programs and the understanding of that. I believe that's this week or possibly next week.
Tomorrow morning, I think.
Tomorrow, yeah. So I will be attending that for tomorrow. And so I'm hoping to continue to gain better understanding of what's coming our way, so things don't just pop into our lap in the scenarios that we have right now, where when things are a little up in the air in my department, we're able to better track this and
In
know
the
what's going
Department of
on.
Defense, it's been several years since there's been a whole lot of, KDOT took a little slump there for a while, so.
Do we have Linda participating in these processes, just to kind of make sure that she's,
At the moment, I do not. I've communicated with her about a few things that have come our way, but not yet, just.
But we will
She-
have KDOT representatives here
Yeah.
next week.
Linda is working on grant applications, and when she's needed, Lauren has her as a resource. As far as the identifying which grants are available through KDOT for these projects, that's something Lauren's working on.
Yep. And I'll entertain a motion to consider to approve the exchange of federal funds to state for state funds in the amount of $328,265.29.
so moved?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the exchange funds? Voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioners?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren. Oh, yes, I can.
Thank you, Lauren.
Oh, there's two signatures?
Yep.
Wait, get you out here. Thank you.
I think so.
Okay.
That chair was empty.
Are we ready to handle the presentations and discussions on the mental health task force?
Yes, I would invite Keith Rickard, who will be providing the presentation for the Mental Health Task Force created by Commissioner Smith. And then I assisted with putting together the team. And hopefully, the information that will be provided will give the public an idea of what our county is looking at and some ideas of what we might do in the future.
And like I said, the mental health task force got started after we'd went to a conference last fall, and it was a statewide issue. Every county was having issues with this, and it's the first time I'd ever went to that conference that we had a day and a half of talks on it. It's usually you talk about other things going on in the counties with roads and stuff like that, but it was mental health. So anyways, we thought we'd get this started, and then when Commissioner KAAZ came aboard, Stacy handed it off to her because that's kind of her area of expertise. So this is how we got here today.
And Kim Knight also deserves
Absolutely.
recognition for
Well,
this
that's
whole
right.
process as
Kim
well,
came
so.
in July, I
Kim,
believe,
yeah.
of last year. And congratulations on getting a grant.
Yeah.
Think
Yep, worked hard on that
Maybe
one,
you need
so.
to do that for all the school districts in the county.
That's my next goal.
Somebody's got to do it.
In my spare time.
Compliant, right?
Yeah. So anyways, that's a little history how we got here today. So whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioners, for allowing us to present today. We did present to you a written report and proposal back in July, and this was the first date we could get on board with sharing this with you publicly and with the public as well. So we appreciate the opportunity to do that today. I'm Keith Rickard, the Executive Director of the Guidance Center, and I would like to recognize Mike Griswold first and foremost. He was the facilitator of our group, of our task force. He was pretty much the keeper of the notes, reports, and he actually put together the written report, and I served really as the editor, which is also true for this PowerPoint presentation that I'm giving you today. But I'm starting here with the list of those that participated in this study. And I'd like for those that are here in the room to stand up to be recognized if you were a part of the committee task force. These are people to ask questions of later if you have them as well. So I've also got a couple of board members from the Guidance Center here today as well. But this is the list. Let's see, there you go. There's the others, the second list. People that participated in this. So a broad spectrum of community members came together for this study and for this review. Let's see. That's sorry. Go back here. Follow my notes. Follow your notes. This was the task force mission was to study the mental health crisis in Leavenworth County to identify the needs of citizens with mental illness and recommend solutions to meet these needs while simultaneously raising awareness of the crisis among the citizenry of the county. We formed a group of elected officials and other volunteers, subject matter experts, to look at data, which is also included in the report, written report that I provided to you, and I understand you've published on your website. The final end state was to provide to you a written report with recommended solutions as a part of consideration for the 2020, 21, 2022 budget process. So just kind of start with that. I want to thank Vicky KAAZ too. She was present for all, if not most, of those presentations, and she provided lunch for us each and every day out of the goodness of her heart, and which made us a much more productive group than we otherwise would have been. So thanks, Vicky. She's always been very gracious about that. Let's just begin here, which is a discussion really of why is there a mental health crisis in the nation and in Leavenworth County specifically. And we're seeing the same kinds of trends in our community that are seen on a national basis. It affects a broad swath of important functional institutions and programs throughout the county. Part one of this report provides evidence of that situation, including delineating the insufficiency of the county's current mental health care and services to meet the needs of those citizens with mental health problems. And I'll pause here just a moment too, that back in the early 2000s, we saw widespread community support for mental health when donors came forward with $2.4 million to build the facility that we have on Limit Street, which I think is a state-of-the-art, beautiful facility, which is inviting to those with mental health and addiction problems to come. And so that was a great time of community support for mental health. And this task force and the interest that has been shown here, I think, really represents a new day for the community in mental health and recognition. I'm impressed. I just celebrated my 29th year sitting in this seat as the director of the Guidance Center, and I've probably never been more hopeful of an engaged community to really come together to meet the needs of those serving or experiencing mental health and addiction problems. We do, in the first part of the written report, you'll see evidence of the situation delineating the insufficiency of the county's current mental health system. But the following functions, institutions, and programs are addressed. This is really what we looked at. We looked at issues of concern for local hospitals, the suicide rates in the county. We looked at community corrections programs. We looked at Leavenworth County Youth, which primarily is concerning the school systems in Leavenworth County and what to do about that. Our own Guidance Center, the Community Mental Health Center, and our issues with historical funding and what the future looks like for us. We took a look at county funding, which I want to say that data is already obsolete. Most anytime you publish a report, the data is obsolete. And I want to thank you, too, for the increase of $89,000 in support for the Guidance Center for fiscal year 2020. So I want to acknowledge you for that. The Interfaith Community of Hope, which sponsors our homeless shelter, as well as Welcome Central, and then issues at the Leavenworth County Jail. Opportunity costs are mentioned on page 26 of the written report. I think I want to kind of hover here just a bit around this slide and the things that we're taking a look at, and why is there a crisis really in our nation, in our communities. And I think we all have to recognize that the opioid and meth crisis in the nation is one that also affects our local communities, and it affects law enforcement, it affects the court systems, and I think there's evidence of that here. The suicide rate for our communities is as high or higher than some other communities in the state of Kansas and in the nation, and the school district school districts are reporting suicide attempts and completions at higher rates. Suicide continues to be the second leading cause of death among those who are in the teenage years, basically 16 to 24. And that is obviously a concern and something that we need to address. I think that one of the biggest concerns really has been in the state's system of mental health and the closure of beds at Osawatomie State Hospital. That was a major event that caused clients in our local community needing services to back up into our emergency rooms, to back up into our streets, to back up into and come into contact with law enforcement when they reduced beds from 200, in excess of 200 beds to less than 160 beds. We saw, once again, a crisis occurring in local communities. The community mental health centers in Kansas would screen all patients prior to admission to the state hospital. If we determined they needed to go, they went. Whether they met admission criteria or not, if there were no community resources, they went to the state hospital to have those issues worked through and to return them to the community once those problems were resolved. That obviously created problems for the state hospital system. They lost their certification, but they were meeting a critical need that local communities were not having to address because they were being addressed in state hospitals. So now those patients are no longer eligible or they're on a waiting list to go to the state hospital, and they then back up into emergency rooms and hospitals where they're oftentimes provided free care until that hospital bed opens up. If they become too problematic behaviorally and they commit crimes, obviously they become arrested. Our jails, our local jail has counselors on staff there, and that is obviously because of the increased number of mentally ill people in the jail systems. And that is a problem that we need to continue to address. So those are, in my opinion, the backdrop of why this is such a crisis and why we need to do more moving forward. Part 2 of the report, each solution is described briefly, costed out and scheduled for implementation over multiple years. The first of these three issues are Youth Mental Health Initiative, enhance the Guidance Center services, and establish a residential crisis facility within Leavenworth County. This recommendation is contingent upon a feasibility study to determine the financial viability of this facility. This first issue is the Youth Mental Health Initiative. Involves fulfilling our goal of putting a clinical therapist in every school in our county. And we have costed that out to determine what would cost for the guidance center to staff those schools with those clinical therapists to provide the clinical oversight, the documentation, as well as ancillary services that those kids might need and their families might need. The good news here, again, our report is obsolete in that the state's plan for school-based therapy has been expanded. They had a grant program and a pilot program for about 6 districts across Kansas in their first year. It was successful. The model for that is for the schools to hire what we call a mental health liaison, someone who identifies the needs of the kids in the school, who then refers them to the therapist employed by the school district. The grant that the state is providing provides for 75% of the cost for the liaison, 25% of the cost for the mental health provider through the community mental health center. The remainder of those funds are supposed to come from third-party reimbursement, insurance reimbursement, Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. And so that expanded this year, and Leavenworth Schools applied for that. We supported that application and we won. And our therapist for Leavenworth High School starts Monday. So we're happy that we've been able to accomplish that. And again, we're working through the memorandum of understanding between us, but we've already begun the process. And so recommendations moving forward, whether we continue to participate in the state's grant system, whether it happens too slowly to meet the needs of our local community is a question yet to be answered.
Keith, quick question. When you did your presentation at the Guidance Center, remind me, but I think you communicated that this opportunity existed to all of the schools and it was only Leavenworth that engaged to apply for the grant. Is that correct, or am I?
To my understanding, yes. I didn't see the applications, but to my understanding is yes, Leavenworth applied.
And one thing I can speak to that, the grant wasn't actually released until the end of, for application until the end of May. And you had to have a lot of things in place for it to be submitted in June. 3 weeks later is how long we had to turn it around. You had to already have the agreements basically put together with the guidance center and have everything structured and have an agreement from your district to pay the difference, because there is a difference. There's the 25% of the liaison salary that's paid by the district, and then the remainder, whatever's not reimbursed for the therapist, comes out of the district pocket. So because of the work that I had done over the past few years, we had everything lined up because it was almost exactly the program that we had been working to get. The other districts were not as lucky. So I think that explains a lot of why it would have been really difficult for them to turn that around that quickly. So I do think that, we kind of mentioned, that's something that we can continue to help push along the way. But we also know, after meeting with the state a couple weeks ago, that this is not necessarily a permanent thing. It's temporary funds.
Sure.
So.
It could be, though.
Could be.
If you get some pressure on a lot of school districts and the representatives, I think it could be. Especially if you have a successful program like you're getting ready to start.
Any other questions so far?
Not at this time.
Recommendation number 2, enhance the guidance center services. And just this past spring, I presented to the commission the funding dilemma for community mental health in Kansas, and specifically for the guidance center. I demonstrated through charts and graphs that our base level of funding from the county, from state grants, from state aid has been constant for the last at least 12 years. And the only increases that we have seen during that time was increases in Medicaid funding. And I explained that in 1990, when mental health reform began, there was an allocation of state grant funds to community mental health for us to build a system of care to create community-based options in lieu of state hospitalization. We did that from 1990 to 2000, saw tremendous growth. State then decided that it wanted to build its system on the backs of Medicaid using federal assistance, and therefore took our grant money back and told us to build Medicaid for services for further growth. And that's when we saw the Medicaid growth funding for the community mental health center system. But in 2012, the state then contracted with private insurance companies to manage Medicaid. So we began to see a reduction in Medicaid funding from about 2013 until today. So with all of our base level funding being constant, our Medicaid rates, or Medicaid funds being decreased, obviously we are in a non-sustainable position moving forward. And we're already beginning to see problems with recruiting and retaining qualified staff. I did lose my medical director of 8 years to one of the managed care companies here recently, so we're in the recruiting mode. We just lost a staff member. We have a grant together called Project Change through the Community Corrections, and the person that we hired to do that has been a 5-year staff member, and she left us recently for a better paying job with better insurance. And so, once again, we find ourselves having a difficult time retaining, recruiting, and rewarding our staff if our budgets are continuing to shrink. And so, enhancement of the guidance center services, basically, I'm looking for an enhancement of salary increase for 5% for my staff over the next couple of years. For everyone except myself, I've excluded myself from the numbers that are presented here. But I'll show you that in the next slide. The third is to establish a residential crisis facility within Leavenworth County. One of the alternatives to state hospital beds has been the creation of crisis residential centers throughout the state. One of those is at Rainbow Services, Inc. in Wyandotte County, and many of us have visited that center to see what they have. They have 6 sobering beds, they have 20-some beds for 24-hour crisis resolution, and they have some residential beds for 30 days or more. That is something that we have considered here in Leavenworth County, but a shorter-term goal might be to create a couple of crisis beds within our building at 500 Limit Street. We could do that with some adjustments in walls, etc., making accommodation for housekeeping, laundry, and food service, to have a couple of beds so that as patients wait for hospitalization, they can wait at our facility as opposed to a local hospital, or certainly, more importantly, the local jail. So that's presented here as well.
Question, Keith. Is that feasibility study being conducted?
No, not yet.
Okay. And who would do that feasibility study?
The recommendation here is that, once again, the commissioners commission a group of people that you believe have the expertise and trust to do that, to come back with some recommendations.
Okay, so you're wanting the county to conduct the study?
Or just to commission it, yes. Recommendation number 4 is to continue to fund the Sheriff's Department mental health therapy program. Sheriff Dedeke has had a therapist there. We initially, together, the Guidance Center and the Sheriff's Department partnered with a burn grant to create a position at the jail. The burn grant lasted 1 year. They went a different direction with funding, and so we lost that, but the sheriff was able, through his own funds, his own budget, to keep that program going. And I understand it's a very, very important program at the jail. Recommendation number 5 is to go on record as supporting the expansion of the number of state hospital beds or increased local community crisis beds, consistent with the Kansas Mental Health Task Force that submitted a report in January of 2019. We're wanting to return to 206 beds at the state hospital at Osawatomie. The last recommendation is to consider going on record as supporting the expansion of Medicaid eligibility, as recommended also by the Kansas Mental Health Task Force in January, and raising the rates of reimbursement. Provide in the report that Medicaid rates of reimbursement to community mental health or for behavioral health have been the same since 2007. We all know that premiums for every health insurance have gone up since 2007. assuming that that's going to providers. In the case of Medicaid, it is not. Our rates have been, reimbursement have been the same since 2007, so we're seeking through our Association of Communal and Mental Health Centers both the expansion of Medicaid, but also the increase of Medicaid rates by 4% over time. So that is what we consider to be a funding strategy moving forward that puts the spreads, I guess, the financial support of community mental health across all taxpayers, not just local taxpayers. And I think I'm sure I presented to you that our options are really increased county funding, increased state funding, increased federal funding, or a decrease in the number of people served and the services provided. We're simply at a crossroads where we either need increased funding or we'll see a reduction in services across the board. These recommendations are crafted to meet the mental health needs of the county's youth, adults, juveniles, and Leavenworth County Community Corrections, prisoners at the county jail, and the homeless mentally ill. This is a kind of a summary of those that are currently being underserved. I've kind of spoken to these, maybe gotten ahead of myself on these slides, but we also know that there continues to be a problem at the homeless shelter. The number of mentally ill people that are undiagnosed, that are not receiving mental health services continues to be a concern. They do a high volume of service at the homeless shelter, and they're finding many of those people that have mental health problems. Our problem is that I can't just commission a person to be on staff there without additional resources, and so the recommendations here also consider that. So here is a summary of those action steps. Recommendation number 1, provide clinician support to the county secondary schools, meaning middle school, high schools, and then a second plan to do that in the elementary schools. Increase the Guidance Center compensation. 2B, provide 1 mental health caseworker to the Shelter of Hope. This is someone that we would embed within the homeless shelter to identify those with mental health problems, to help them gain access to Medicaid and other benefits that they might be eligible for, and to basically walk them into services both at the Guidance Center and other places that might be needed. 2D is to operate a crisis residential center within the Guidance Center, which would be in basically our crisis unit that we have now. And then thirdly, to conduct a feasibility study for a financial liability of a residential crisis facility somewhere in the county, serving Leavenworth County, perhaps Atchison, Brown, and other counties as well, much like Rainbow Services, Inc. Having our own program would be beneficial. But we need a follow-on action, a study, a feasibility study for that to occur. Recommendation to fund the Sheriff's Department, continue to allocate and approve his budget. Go on record with the state elected officials in Leavenworth County serving in the Kansas House about the number of beds at the state hospital. And then consider being on record in writing with elected officials serving in the Kansas House for the expansion of Medicaid eligibility. And I know that that's a potential political issue, a conflictual issue, but I'm not certain what options we have. It is difficult. Medicaid eligibility in Kansas is the most stringent in the state, and expanding Medicaid would bring health insurance to a large number of people. 34% of the resident or the clients of the Guidance Center are currently uninsured, meaning working poor people. They can't afford insurance, and they don't qualify for Medicaid benefits, and we continue to write off over $1 million in service to them each year. So these are the projected costs: $411,000 to support the secondary schools, elementary schools $389,000, $365,000 for a 5% increase for the Guidance Center staff, $65,000 for an employee at the Shelter of Hope, $150,000 to modify the facilities we presently have at the Guidance Center to create a 2 or 3 bed unit to support law enforcement and the local hospitals, and about $500,000 a year to operate that. Conducting a financial feasibility study of $300,000 for the crisis facility. I'm not certain that it would cost that, but we would need facilitators in order to accomplish that goal. Am I going too fast? Am I saying too much? No? Okay. Obviously, there are no costs for recommendations 5A and 6A of expanding beds at the state hospital or expanding Medicaid eligibility. A phase strategy to fund the 6 recommendations over a 5-year period is included in the report and outlined in this staff, in this next slide. Sorry, $1.4 million in 2021 and 2022, $1.8 million the year 2023 through 25. Now, we've talked about how to make that happen from a county perspective. We know that the taxing authority of the county based on land mass, et cetera, is restricted. But if we're going to move forward, we need community support to make this happen. And we've talked about the possibility of establishing a mill levy tax vote of the public in Leavenworth County sometime in the new year to determine their support for these programs and for this expansion of service in the county. And so that's what is recommended here, although not stated specifically, but we're looking at about $1.8 million increase from current county expenditures moving forward. That can go down, perhaps, with increased support through the county or through the state school-based mental health program. It obviously can go up as well based on increased needs of our community.
Next question on that. As part of that, it seems like part of that should be absorbed through the school districts. And was that addressed by your task force?
You know, we did discuss that, and I think that schools are already, through the state grant program, being forced to ante up education dollars to support the mental health needs of their community. They're going to pay 25% of the behavioral health liaison that they employ, and they're going to cover my losses that I can't cover through third-party reimbursement. So that has been addressed. One of the concerns that we had statewide as the behavioral health plan for schools began to unfold and the pilot projects developed was that the schools would create their own behavioral health service. We have a safety net service, we have a community behavioral health service, and community mental health centers are it. And if we create a competing entity, we obviously would be losing employees to the school districts that would restrict our access to community. We didn't want to create that kind of competition. So we want to keep the actual, this is our expertise, this is what we do. We want to deliver these services in partnership with schools, not have them to develop that on their own. Question comes, is funding mental health, whose responsibility is it? And in my years of experience, I know that obviously the needs exist. Finding funding is very difficult. People ending up, hey, yeah, we'll pay for that. I don't have anybody shouting, let me help with that financially. But we know as citizens of the community, we're going to have to step forward to fund these services if we hope to have safe, healthy communities to live in. We all recognize now the importance of integrated care. Behavioral health care is as important as health care, and they're very intricately linked. So whether schools can levy taxes for mental health staff, I'm certain that it's probably within their authority to do so. I think that would have to be really kind of reviewed, but we know that counties have that authority under current statutes to levy taxes for mental health, both for facilities as well as for operations.
Mark, is that underneath the tax lid, or is that exempt from the tax lid?
Well, I think anything that we do would probably fall under the tax lid, but certainly any increase in the mill levy for the project that's being proposed would have to go to the voters.
So, because last year we increased from 197 to 286, but you're talking about spending 1.4 million from the county per year, and then are you asking other entities of the other local government entities for similar type increases?
You mean the cities?
School districts, I mean, it's a really steep increase.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it, again, in my presentations over time, we have a growing need. We have a shrinking level of funding for that growing need, and so what are we going to do about it? Again, I've been to the cities over time and to ask for support at different times with minimal success in accomplishing that. The city did issue the bonds for our building that we built and supported that. But again, the authority for taxing citizens for behavioral health, mental health, really currently rests in Kansas statutes for counties. I'm certain cities could do it, and we could develop a strategy for asking cities to help and to support with that. That could be a part of the task force's ongoing mission.
So Keith, I think you mentioned that Jefferson and Atchison County were following a very similar support of an increase for the 2020. What were those amounts? I apologize, I don't know that. And I'm assuming the almost 100,000 in incremental funding we came up with would come off of that 1.4, right? We already said that as soon as these are published, they are out of date, so.
Actually, Atchison County did not increase funding. They increased the year before, but Jefferson County did increase by 25%, which came to, I think, about $20,000.
Okay, that's all it was, okay.
What percentage of the Guidance Center's budget is funded through private donations?
Private donations. Well, we do an annual fund drive, set a goal every year of about $35,000, and we've been able to achieve that $35,000 goal.
Out of a budget of, what's your total budget?
Right now, it's real close to $9 million.
9 million.
This is a slightly change in direction, but we had this KTA meeting recently, and we were talking about potential ways to, help with some transportation issues. And I'm curious, how much of, today's overhead or expenses are currently allocated to the transportation services you provide. And if we were going to help build that out, not only would we get a match for any expenses or services you have today, assets and personnel, but we could potentially expand on top of that and use some other funding.
Yes. So I was able to attend the meeting last week on the Transit Authority, but I did the previous one. And the Guidance Center over the years has had KDOT grants, and we've had different transportation services. Obviously, we developed those for behavioral health clients to get them to and from the services that we deliver. But we've also run a public transit system in the past. Small one, and we are certainly open to continuing to talk about that. Mary Dwyer from the city reached out to me, and I think I have a meeting with she and other representatives of the state next Friday at 8 o'clock. So I'm waiting to hear a final about that. But we're willing to, obviously, to work with that. We can't use, with the dilemma that we're in, we can't use behavioral health funds to provide transportation the general population of this city. We'd have to have support, but we already have, like I said, transportation director, we already have some vehicles, we have a process in place, licensure and certification, so all of that's in place.
And I don't understand all the ins and outs clearly, but it would just seem like if, let's say that was a $100,000 line item today, and we wanted to expand that to a $300,000 line item, and we could get, 70% type funding,
right.
And the county, for example, could help to, help with that match. I mean, I would think that would put dollars back in the Guidance Center's budget.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely. There is a mental health center down in Independence. Ford County Mental Health Center runs the entire county transportation system, and as I guess as an adjunct service to the community. Obviously, they deliver a lot of their own clients, but they also run the general transportation system for the entire city.
And that's in Independence, Kansas, southeast Kansas?
I'd like to ask a question. Okay, we're discussing the cost of providing mental health services in our community. Is it less expensive to do that type of work and the prevention work that goes along with that than the long-term hospitalization or incarceration of individuals with mental illness?
Well, I think obviously the answer to that is yes, it's more expensive. to not provide these services than it is to provide them. The consequence, I mean, these needs are already being met in inappropriate settings and locations and staffing. Hospitals are writing off. The Hospital Association's gone on board with supporting Medicaid expansion because obviously they are absorbing a great deal of loss as a result of taking care of behavioral health patients without the capacity or billing capacity to do so. Jails are, again, have too many people suffering mental health problems in the local communities. And again, they're backing up there as a result of us not doing things at the front end.
And do we not place our community at large at risk when we have to take the time of law enforcement to become supervisors of an individual in crisis, as opposed to being able to have some place for that individual to be taken by the police officers or sheriff's deputies when they have to take that individual into custody and cannot leave them unattended?
I think Chief Kitchens reported about 200 calls a year for suicide patients that they address and deal with. Isn't that right?
218.
Thank you.
Is that increasing over the years or decreasing?
That's in the report.
Historical data for the past 10 years, say.
Commissioner, we've seen a fairly steady increase. Last year, we had 218 calls for service involving mental health calls. That's the highest we've had in about 7 or 8 years. I can go back farther and look, but it's been...
I figured the way you rattled off numbers, you had that on top of your head.
And
so the answer to the question is yes, we've seen a steady increase over the last few years of dealing with people that are mentally suffering mental illness or issues in the community.
Okay.
Any guess as to why that might be? And just something that you observe?
You know, it's always associated with several things, one of which is some type of substance abuse, either alcohol or drugs. I agree with Keith's assessment about the opioid crisis, making it worse, enhancing it, making it more dangerous, requiring more resources from us to mitigate the circumstances when there's crisis. And so, but that's sort of been the way it's been in the law enforcement profession. It just seems worse in the last 5 years, and that is our best guess about why is substance abuse, and then particularly the opioid crisis that he talked about over the last 4 or 5 years.
Does it track with the poverty rate?
I'm going to say no, but I can't say that with any documented proof. What we do know about mental health is it's not a respecter of persons. The same is true with addiction. And so people from all walks of life, economic status, experience mental health and behavioral health, psychiatric crises at the same rate as those living in poverty. Those living in poverty, however, have a harder time getting to the resources that they need, or because of transportation. That's one of the reasons we think at providing schools with a therapist is the biggest issue is the barrier of transportation after school, during school, before school, having them right there when they need the service is what we think is critical. I put up the slide that Chief Kitchens provided the data on the suicidal calls and rates for Leavenworth County, the city of Leavenworth.
Chief Kitchen, how many years you been in law enforcement?
December 1st will be 29.
About 30 years.
Keith, while I think most would agree that it is blind, there's no statistic that would select who would suffer more from, mental or behavioral health issues. Is it? I don't know if we've done any studies on this, but it would seem, we have a higher population of people that have both been in and also out of the prison system, and also family members that move and relocate. And so I wonder, because of that population, do we have, maybe it's increased or we see more of these? Because there is clearly a correlation. I mean, many times those are the things that ultimately land you in a correctional institution. And obviously we have a higher concentration than
else.
Well, you have to also understand, adverse childhood experiences are one of the other things that have been directly attached to behaviors, whether they be mental illness or activities that go outside the bounds of the law, or high-risk behaviors. All those things, a lot of those things can be tracked back to experiences in childhood, whether it be abuse or living with a parent with a drug addiction, physical abuse, witnessing domestic violence. All of those things can negatively impact someone's development and their brain as it's developing. So the earlier that we can begin to capture those things and take care of those issues, the better the outcome for the individual is as they transition into adulthood. So I think that it's important, that's one of the things that's important. There was a question about the socioeconomic aspects of things, and I think that one of the things that they have begun to look at and see is that actually sometimes people who are more financially challenged are more resilient and resourceful. And so, individuals from more middle class or higher income levels succumb to a lot more readily to some of the stressors that someone who is more used to, that type, things. So we're dealing with a whole mix of things. We're dealing with cycles of poverty, and then we're also dealing with cycles of abuse. And then we're dealing with cycles of addiction. And all those things have to stop at some point in order to really be able to look at over long term, how can we effectively deal with these things and does it work?
So while I don't disagree with any of that, my point is more around funding and trying to find funding sources. So if there was any type of correlation that could be made, I'm curious what, if any, recourse we might be able to have in petitioning, whether that be the state or federal government. Those are entities that obviously are not directly contributing to the tax base, right? So it's not funds that we can easily allocate to issues like this. I've said many times, and I'm sorry to be on that soapbox, but the population that I was describing is largely unemployable by the employers we have in Leavenworth County. When your top 12 or 13 employers will not hire that demographic of people, it is a self-perpetuating issue. So anything that we can do to approach them that might say, we have this issue is in part, if we can prove it, associated with these institutions and facilities, what type of funding, if any, can we ask or request or apply for? Or beg. I'm happy to go with anybody to beg. I'm not too proud to get on my knees.
Well, I'm right there with you, Jack.
You don't get the taxes off the property they're sitting on.
Sure.
And it's trickle-down effect.
In my time in Leavenworth, I only recall some discussion years ago about the fact that so much of the land mass is not taxable because it's owned by the federal government. And as a result of that being the case, shouldn't the federal government, since we're a Class A city, we need all the same services in every other city, shouldn't the federal government ante up to provide for the basic support services that the community needs? And I think there's always been a deaf ear turn.
Well, I think that we're beginning to look at and question some of the potential for that, and we don't know where that will go, but it's something that's being looked at and addressed by the community.
I wonder if that study hasn't existed, I'm curious if that study could be conducted. And just like your Family Crisis Center, I'd be very interested for the Guidance Center or the Mental Task Force or somebody to maybe go to some of these consultants that might be able to do that type of study and then put that proposal in front of us, what it would cost to actually get those statistics.
I know when I was doing some of my research previously for juvenile detention, that there was a rate of about 70% of those that had been in juvenile detention did suffer from some kind of diagnosable mental illness. And that was put out by NAMI. So the, what is it, National Association of Mental Illness?
National Alliance for the Mentally Ill.
Yeah. So there are some studies out there that do show some of those statistics, and I do think that is a very good point. That we do, and as Vicki mentioned it as well, with our kiddos that, I'm in a school, so a kid who has a parent that's been incarcerated, maybe also struggles with mental illness. They've now had adverse childhood experiences. Plus, there's the piece of hereditary concerns. If mom had bipolar, had issues, was arrested, incarcerated, that increases the child's chance of also having bipolar, and now has a childhood adversary, all these issues that you're starting to put into play. So.
A question about, and maybe somebody in your task force can address it, of the people that we service in the jail with mental health services, what percentage of them are also, overlapping with drug and alcohol issues? Do you-
Well, the representative is.
Sheriff had a meeting out of town. I'm Mark Metcalf from the Sheriff's Office. Almost all.
Almost all.
Yes.
In my experience, opioid addicts and meth addicts, there are three paths. They either go to prison, they die, or they get into recovery. Nobody lives with that for a long period of time, and they spend an inordinate amount of their lives in prisons, on the streets, and they die at a young age. So I think that we can continue to incarcerate them, or we can create opportunities for recovery. And that's obviously been my life passion and life goal. And I think we've done a great deal along that, but we have so much more to do, and I'm probably too old to see it to where I'd like to see it be. But that's what we're considering.
One of your recommendations is this Medicaid expansion piece. Would you have a problem if the board, when we discuss it, I don't know when that'll come up, but if we would attach a caveat to that we say, we support the Medicaid expansion, but we also agree that able-bodied people, we agree with work requirements for able-bodied people be attached as part of our position. Would you have a problem with us attaching that?
I think that the Senate is working on a similar proposal now with the governor as they talk about Medicaid expansion. And if it brings additional resources to the people that we serve, I could support that. Absolutely. I think there's some misunderstanding or that we're going to have 21-year-old able-bodied men playing video games in the basement but getting Medicaid, eligible for Medicaid. I don't think that's true.
But we want to make sure that's
we want to make
true.
sure that, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. We want to make sure that's true, that these truly are people that meet medical necessity, that have, and even if they get it, they have to meet medical necessity for whatever's delivered. But it's extremely difficult for Kansans to get Medicaid at the present time. It's like the federal poverty level. They used to set Medicaid eligibility at the federal poverty level in Kansas. In its agreement with the state, set it at 36%. So there was this gap of eligibility in Kansas. So it's more difficult in Kansas than it is in most states, and I think there are up to 38 states or so now that have expanded Medicaid. So we're still among those that haven't accepted those federal dollars as infusion into our local economy and into our healthcare system.
Did you have something, sir?
Yes, the expansion of Medicaid would cover working poor, not unemployed poor. In other words, the income level is so low that if you have a job and you want Medicare, you might quit your job. But if you give them Medicare coverage, Medicaid coverage, maybe they would continue to work. Obviously, they would. They want to work, but they can't get coverage. If you get coverage, you have to quit your job. So it's a disincentive as it is structured now.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But
you
I
still
think
put that.
I think what I've heard from some of the legislators that I visited with about this is the issue about the able-bodied people working, and if you don't have a problem with that being attached, I think that I don't have a problem with it.
I'd like to make one more comment about that, if I might. People who are on Medicaid don't get anything. They just give the doctor's availability. The doctor gets all of the money, or the nurse, or, it's not that people on Medicaid get any money at all. Those 21-year-old that's sitting and playing video games, if he gets carpal tunnel and goes to the doctor gets paid. But this guy sitting at home gets not one penny because he's on Medicaid. All of the money goes to healthcare providers.
But that being said, he's getting free medical care and he's sitting at home playing video games. That's the
I don't have any problem with the work requirement, but they don't get any money.
Right. I understand that. Thank you.
And Keith, just so you have the figure, when you talked about the amount of property that's not taxable. For the area that you service, it's $2.5 billion in valuation that we do not get taxes from federal property.
$2.5 million?
Billion.
No, I was gonna say, I thought you said million, I said
Two and a half.
off there.
$2.5 billion is not taxable.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you correctly.
Yeah,
I thought like making him say it twice.
with a B.
Well,
That's what I thought he was going for too.
No, I didn't hear you, because I thought, but anyway, I think, I mean, I agree, the guidance center needs to be the folks in charge of all the school districts. If you're gonna send a licensed clinician to a school district, I don't think nobody should stand alone. I think that it should be that. But that being said, I was hoping there'd be more school district people here today. Because I see, but, because from what I'm hearing, it's basically, it's in the schools, it needs to start in the schools early.
But actually, Doug, it's.
Services.
Well, the services, that's just a convenient place, and it
Right.
also needs to start in early childhood programs. There's a lot, I mean, it needs to step down. The thing is that it's a public health issue.
It is.
And we need to stop differentiating between mental health and physical health. A sick brain is part of the body. And whether it is as a result of, mental illness that is hereditary, or as a result of experiences, or if it's addictions, all of those things are a physical thing that take place in the brain. And there's no difference between a sick brain and a sick heart, or sick kidneys, or,
Brains and organ, you mean?
pancreas, right.
Okay.
So we have to stop kind of
All right.
saying, well, in the schools, it's a convenient place for this to happen in the schools. Is the biggest
Absolutely.
reason that we're saying, let's do this at school, because of the transportation issues, because of the access issues, because of all of those things. If we can get those done in preschools, if we can get the work done in schools, then kids in the after-school hours can become productive individuals in their lives and have better social skills, get into less trouble when they're out of school hours. It's a win-win situation to do it in those daytime hours.
I think everybody agrees with that. I think as one of the very first things we talked about today in approving a new bond was how much easier it can be sometimes for schools to obtain funding. So if the schools are a vehicle to help supplement some of the costs associated with it, and they have some of the most interaction and direct access to these kids, it's something to look at. I mean, it's
But
all ships rise with the
and
tide.
on
We gotta
left
find
hand, I
more
mean,
and more
it's-
funding
it's-
sources, so.
I can speak to the schools a little bit, and fortunately, I have a board member behind me as well. We've spoken about this quite a bit, and we are very much so of the belief that it is a community health a problem that we're seeing in the schools, and we're charged with educating kids. At one of the meetings a long time ago, I was asked, okay, so if we gave you $100,000, what would you do with it? And as an educator, I have to decide, do I spend that on making my kid healthy, or do I spend that on trying to teach my kid math and reading? And, through the course of many years of cuts in education, we lost a lot of fundamental positions, interventionists, that kind of stuff, where, we have kids that struggle, that come not ready for kindergarten, that have never seen letters before, and never seen numbers before, and we've got to fill that gap. Education is incredibly hard, and we have a lot of pieces that we have to take into account. We've got thousands of kids all on different levels. But when they come to us unhealthy, okay, we can't educate them because they're not ready to learn. And so when they walk in our building and they're sick, either they're sick because they have a heart defect, or they're sick because their tooth is in pain and they need to go to a dentist, or they're sick because they're struggling with depression and considering suicide at that point. We don't feel that's the school's place necessarily to fix that problem. Our problem is to fix them learning. They're learning. They're learning how to read and learning how to do math and learning about economics and become successful citizens. What we want to do is provide the avenue to help our kids get healthy. Okay,
And just to be clear, I wasn't advocating for the school to take on even more.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is no different than this grant we talked about this morning. How amazing would it be if every school district in Leavenworth County was able to apply and, let's say, obtain $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 worth of funding, not so that you have to do more, so that it could be allocated to, say, the guidance center, so they could do a lot more with it and are better equipped. So if if every stakeholder is able to contribute, even if it's small, so oftentimes I feel like this group it's all or nothing, either the county funded or nothing.
Right.
I think there's a way to do it where the county can supplement, and sometimes it's going to be a large supplement.
Right.
But everybody is in it together.
And I think the schools right now, like we're doing the grant, but pretty much every district we have social workers already. We're already doing some of these things. And honestly, we all have school counselors that are taking on jobs that is more than what they were even trained to do.
That's correct.
So in a lot of ways, we already are taking on the burden. The problem is that it's like that never-ending wheel of there's always more coming, and we're not necessarily fixing the actual problem. Once they leave us, they can't become, productive citizens if they're still struggling with their mental health.
Just delineate too that the clinical social worker, the clinical therapist that we're sending is a distinctly different type of provider than what the school presently employs. They might have some skills, but those clinical therapists are trained in diagnosis and treatment of mental illness, and have the license capacity to do so, and also have the additional resources of psychiatry, med management, psychosocial case management at the guidance center as adjunct services to whatever's identified for a need in the school. So that's just adding that on. It does need to be partnerships. It does need, and I think that, again, we didn't know that the state was going to expand its grant program until after the report was done. And we're going to, obviously, next year, if it's expanded, I'm certain that other school districts will jump on board, especially if it continues to be a success as it has been. And it could be that $411,000, $365,000 numbers just disappear by this time next year. But if it doesn't, how long do we want to wait before we start delivering those services in all the schools in the district?
And how long before the state decides
They don't want
not
it.
going to provide that funding, like the county has already experienced multiple other, this is almost another one of those unfunded mandates. When they close the beds at the state hospital and expect the communities to pick up the tab to take care of that.
I don't see anybody here from the state.
Well,
I think also I'd just point out, one of the reasons why organizations come to us and ask us for funding on a regular basis is we are the only entity in the county that has the ability to tax everybody in the county, other than those who are exempt, obviously. So what they identify as a community problem, it's throughout the entire county. It's not the Leavenworth School District or Lansing School District, and they do have the ability to generate tax revenue, but there are also private schools out there that can't. And there are also students who live in our county who are not part of a school district that lies within our county.
there's also young
I
adults.
think the idea here is not to treat certain school districts, but to treat kids of a certain age, and that I would think that any of these services would be available to any citizen of that age group, whether they were a member of a school district or not. So it would address those in private schools. I think that's what was being proposed as
well,
my
I think what I'm
understanding.
referring to schools, I mean, you have them kids all day, probably more so than their parents. I mean, interaction with them, you can see it.
Can
Yes,
I just
ma'am.
make a comment about you? You were saying that you were disappointed by the lack of people from schools being here. You're conducting the meeting during school hours. Our administration, our teachers, our counselors, they're at school with the children right now. They can't be here.
I'm
Ms.
sure
Knight
administrators
was a
can
part of
find
the task
time to
force,
come
and
to something as this.
I'm part-time employed. That's why I'm here, so.
I appreciate you being here, but I know a lot of school administrators, and I think they could find a little time out of their busy schedules to be here for something as important as this.
And state representatives.
Yeah. And I haven't ran this by fellow commissioners, but I would like to have a work session in November to put together everything we want to go to the legislature, our wants, needs, requests that we would have, so we'd have it all ready in December, ready to go before the beginning of the session.
I think that's a good idea, but I would also ask that, as the board, we've been provided with the information. We need to look at where do we want to go from here? Do we want as a board to consider looking at whether or not we take the recommendation of placing this type of initiative on a ballot? And then what will it take to educate the public and to get the information that the individuals out here we have a full house today, thank you for coming, who are willing to participate and engage the public in the education process to find out whether or not there is the interest within our communities to enhance mental health services and addiction services, because it is a county-wide issue. It's not a simple issue. And just like we said, oh, they passed a bond, why can't we as citizens who support mental health and behavioral health in our county do the same thing and get the public out and involved and engaged so that we say we are willing to make this investment, or no, we're not. And then the individuals who provide these services can know where they stand and go on about their days. I mean,
I think absolutely that's the right strategy. I was only recommending, let's maybe work the figures backwards. So if it was 1.4 million, which we know we're not equipped to fund fully, and because of some of the changes made to the 2020 budget, incrementally, maybe it's only 1.3. If we're working with other institutions that can apply for grants, just trying to figure out how to get that to 1.2, 1.1, 900, we then can meet and say how much of that gap can the county fund directly, and that means the rest of it we can put on a ballot and ask, rather than ask for all of it. I'd love to see how we can narrow the gap beforehand and find out.
My recommendation would be that a subset of the current task force be put together to further fine-tune this with more recent information, with partnerships that maybe have developed since that time, to identify what's really needed, and then to develop a bond question for the voters with full explanation once we're confident of what that number should look like. And so I would like to see the commission either task the current task force or a subset thereof to continue the process of fine-tuning the recommendations and the financing structure, and to bring that back to you before
we have a work session for the legislature. Mr. Powell.
Yeah, I just think that a slide is so appropriate to this conversation, because as a citizen sitting on this side, we do not understand the scope and the scale of this mental health crisis because it's hidden from us. And so what I would offer to this board and to the others who are sitting here professionally working this is it's time to communicate the number of suicide attempts in our high schools, in our schools, the impact that it's having in our health center. It's not being reported because partially I know we're concerned about copycatting and other things, but we have a crisis and we don't know it. It's not because we don't want to know it, it's because we don't know it. So I would just ask that is critical to this effort if you want to do what you want to do, which is get us on board.
So thanks for bringing that up. Today's report is really a summary of our report, and all of the things that you just said are in a written report. All of that data has been documented. The rest of these slides, past my question and comment, begins to talk about that. These are the hospital stats for emergency rooms, with people backing up 809 people a year between our two hospitals. These numbers already exist, and that would be a part of any kind of bond issue education that we would be doing, would be sharing this very data. So this is the suicides this is the slide on suicides. There's 4 of these slides on suicide, unfortunately. But
yeah, there's 56 pages. It's incredible. It's saddening. But there's 56 pages.
Mr. Powell, do you have a copy of this report?
I'll
have extras.
I can give my copies.
Okay. I've been looking at it since July 24th. So.
I've been helping to look at it since January.
Well, but I just got it. I think I got it July 24th.
Yep.
I've shown like 15 of 46 slides that have that additional backup data that I was.
So are we in agreement that we will try to reach out to a number of firms that might be able to conduct this Family Crisis Center study and what those true costs are, so we can narrow down and find out if it's really 1.4, 1.3, 1.6, what that number is? And then I have no idea what is the deadline as we continue to discuss what the different funding components could be, both the county and around the county, to get something even on the ballot? What is the deadline?
You would have to have an election in the spring in order to allot any money to.
Before we do the budget.
The guidance center for any mental health services that they, I mean, it would have to be the spring. It can't be any later than.
Well, it can be, but it'll be in the next budget.
Then it would go to the next
I
budget.
mean, if you'd
Right.
like to supply it, when we are preparing the 2020, the 2021 budget, the election would have to be held in the spring of next year.
But we're not going to know what the legislature's going to do before
Well,
that.
that's just, it's just the timeline.
Yeah.
So there is no scenario of it being in the next fall election?
No, because we set our budget.
Set your budget.
It's in stone.
We set our budget and it has to be approved before that.
Right, but we're asking.
You could, but then it would be.
The
for
following
20,
years.
22,
Right, okay,
Right.
I got you,
Next year,
yeah.
or 2021.
Which, a mail ballot for the whole county, do you have a ballpark what that would run?
$45,000 or $50,000.
What was the latest just in Tongass School District?
How much?
Yeah,
I have not figured that. It runs around 15.
about 15,000.
But there again, it's just as, someone had said, Mike had referred to, if we put this vote out there, then to educate the public, you have to have a plan in place if the board decides to put a ballot initiative question out there. The education of that public is going to have to be the main goal.
And that was my other question, is can anything be included? I mean, a fact sheet, statistics specific to Leavenworth County?
Well,
What can or
absolutely.
can't you do if it's just informative?
You can just inform them when we've had the sales tax questions that have passed through the county, countywide. Cities have passed sales tax. There is a fact sheet that is supplied by the county or whatever municipality that is holding that election, whether it's a school board, a city, or the county, supplying the facts of the intent of the election, the intent of where this money would be spent. The county cannot come out and say,
Support or.
really a whole lot of yay or nay.
Understood.
They
That's
can
why
only
it's just
supply
data.
Right,
Right.
exactly. But you have a team in place to go out there and inform the public of, a vote yes committee, whatever it may be.
But you could put on the ballot like a 1/4 cent sales tax or something. That could be done in the fall, correct? It wouldn't have to be done before your budget.
No, you could, but there again, you've got to look at, because there's even limits on sales tax that each community has. Say Tonganoxie is, I think, currently probably at their highest level of sales tax. So there's just
Okay.
different things, but yes. of
I didn't
course,
say
we can-
do that, I'm just saying that
Right,
was a
we can
scenario.
put a sales tax question on in November.
After the budget is done.
This slide that I've just put up is kind of speaking to what we're talking about here. Next steps, formulate a plan to strategically communicate this study to the community. And then, if this is something that, what we've presented to you, you agree with us that this is a crisis, this is something we should do something about. If the voters agree, then we would work together toward educating them about that with the data that's already been collected and the additional data that can be collected and fine-tuning that cost for the next 3 or 4 years. That's what we're recommending, and I think the current committee can continue that work, continue to meet once a month for the next few months, or twice a month perhaps, to get going if we're going to look at a March election, budget election. So.
And the KAAZ conference will be in Wichita this year, is that correct? It's in Wichita, in
November.
first part of November? Or is it the middle of November? Anyway.
It's like the second week.
Second week in November.
Will you be attending that, Keith?
If you want me to.
I mean, that's what kicked
I
this
did
off last year.
Yeah.
So it'd be And maybe
Our
being it's in
association
Wichita,
conference.
there'll be a lot more people there in the western part of the state.
Keith, last week it was pretty obvious, like Mike Smith, City Lansing Mayor, recommended that the KTA authority that did their presentation come and speak to the city council. I know that you have just loads of free time. I'm curious if this presentation has been done, or is it even on the calendar to potentially do in front of any of the city councils or even school boards? I mean, just as a...
I think out of respect for the Board of County Commissioners, because that was the group who actually requested that this be done.
Right.
This report was held and provided just now to
everybody,
us,
yeah,
and now has
out.
just gone out to the public. So I'm sure that Keith or Kim or other individuals who served on the task force would probably go to the city council meetings if invited, or...
Yeah, I just don't want to assume. I think it's
We would hope
it's
to
tremendous data to share.
partner
so.
with Leavenworth Times to get this data out, provide the report. I think we have provided the report. Maybe to do a series of articles about the needs and create some community comment questions. I'm sure we'll have community forums to discuss it, receive feedback over time. So, yeah, this is something obviously we'll need broad-based community support to make happen. And I'm committed, I think our committee members are committed to helping with that education process.
So Keith, one question I have, and Doug kind of touched on it, is if the next legislative session, they would adopt Medicaid expansion, how does that change your recommendations?
We writes off $1 million, so maybe that $1 million.
I mean,
now we should have come up with 400.
I mean that does impact putting it on the ballot.
Yeah. Well,
I think it impacts how much we might ask for.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm
Putting it on
saying.
the
But
ballot.
I'd be interested to.
Again, that would probably, yes, change the whole question. But I've been waiting for Medicaid expansion for about 10 years now. We've got the House that has approved it, but the Senate that's still debating it. And I'm certain that they're poised for a robust debate come January about that.
What would you say last session was the closest in the last 10?
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And whether or not the current governor and the House would accept what the Senate proposes as caveats to expansion really is the
Which
question.
gets into the whole, those issues.
So, yeah, it's...
Linda, is that you?
Margaret Howard.
Oh,
I'd just like to say that regardless, even if we got the Medicaid expansion, we as a community can still utilize those monies and give even better services. So I don't think we need to wait to see if we get Medicaid expansion or not. Those dollars are going to go where they're needed, because that's just kind of plugging the hole in the bucket, but that's not really addressing the whole issue. So to me, it's like, go for the gusto, go for the gold. I mean, why are we trying to be like sixth place when we could be first place? I mean,
But you want it to pass.
but
you know.
yes, but it's not like, then we have ownership. As a community, we are still doing what our community needs. And just because to me, everything is like, let's just try to plug the hole the best we can. Let's not go for the gold. We should go for the gold. And so I just sit here thinking, go for it. And then we can do additional good, you know? And he won't be losing all his qualified people because they can go elsewhere to get a better services, or what do you call it, insurance, and better pay.
You know, mental health center system in Kansas is illogically funded. I think I've made that point in the past, that if 34% of our clients are Medicaid clients, or 40%, they're providing 80% of the revenue for the entire population. Obviously, there's a struggle. So the ideal funding system is everybody that comes has a payer source to pay exactly what it costs for us to deliver service, no more, no less. And until everybody has insurance, that's going to be a complicated system of reimbursement. What could I, Do I just need $365,000? That will help to boost and support staff morale, but it won't help me to expand into medication-assisted treatment, which is one of the goals that we have. You know, it won't, there are other things that we want to begin doing that is hard for us to do. If I really needed, if we really wanted to staff the jail with 3 or 4 staff members, that's probably what's needed to really begin an intervention strategy to really start substance abuse treatment in the prison system. Right now, I think they're just doing crisis intervention, suicide assessments in the jail systems. So there's more to be done, obviously, than what's just addressed here, but with that, I'll stop.
But you gotta remember, this task force has been together less than a year.
Right.
Basically, Kim first approached us in July of last year, I believe it was July.
Yeah.
Or was it
That was
late?
the second time. It was April and then.
Yeah, but I mean, when you really,
Yeah.
really, so the report made it out a year after you came to us, I would say.
Yeah.
And then you have not been, the task force has not been together for a year. So I think they've accomplished a lot. in
And I
less than a
thank
year.
them so much.
Yes.
Yeah, very
It's
impressive.
obviously, there's been a lot of work put into this.
And this is very well written.
It is.
And that,
It is.
Mike Griswold did an incredible job with that, and he deserves
Mike
high
couldn't be here
praise.
today. We tried to plan this as soon as we
Yeah.
could. He's in Virginia visiting his son, and so he apologized. He called
Well,
me
his
yesterday.
work is here.
Yeah.
Well, what do
Any
we want to
other
do? Do we
questions?
want to have the task force continue to meet and to begin to fine tune and look at how we
I
want
would
to?
like to, because I think you need to continue to get where we need to be. And I would like, I'd like to have a work session. I don't have Dale feelings about what we want to present to the legislature.
I agree.
And, you know, we can talk a little bit about the $2.5 billion that are tax exempt in here. And I don't know if the state does anything in lieu of taxes.
No,
The state has never done anything in
No,
lieu of taxes.
not for us.
So is the board in agreement that continuing to meet while we, finalize our plan for communicating to the legislation, in addition to coming up with maybe a couple of proposals that might further define this family crisis center, so that we know exactly the target that we need to hit ultimately through, again, county funding and potential ballot and other stakeholders. So,
Are all the commissioners going to go to the conference in November?
yes.
Everybody will be there? Okay, well then, that's where you'll get an eye opener on the rest of the state. And like I said, I think it's probably even worse other parts of the state because of the lack of treatment, I should say. Yes, sir, Mr. Powell.
Not to sound like we're beating a drum, but time's running out on communicating your strategic vision for getting this communicated to the community. So I just offer for the board's consideration that part of what you may want to agree to is for the strategic plan to be developed sooner than later, just from a citizen's perspective.
And how did you not get on this task force, Mr. Powell?
He was invited, he just was busy. But he will come now, right?
If you ask.
He wasn't voluntold.
There you go.
So will your task force then report to us what the actual cost of a feasibility study would be then, and that would be a next?
I want to get some further clarification on the details of that, maybe outside the meeting.
Okay.
But Commissioner Shimke, you talked about a more scientific study of what's contributing to the needs here that some firm could do that might be then presented to federal or state officials. for
yeah, I don't know if it
adjustment.
would be the same or some other third-party type consultant group, but
That's a different study than
it's a different
cost.
study. It would have a different cost
Expensive.
associated with it, but I would think would provide a lot of teeth as we continue to push our friends at the state level as well as federal as to our issues and lack of
I think the
funding.
federal government would have an organization to do that for free.
You would think.
Well, I think this issue, like a lot of issues, unfortunately, is relative. The support you're going to get is relative to people's personal experience with mental health issues, people with mental health issues.
Or if you know something.
The black and white figures that you need to throw out there to people that don't have any personal experience with people with mental health issues are going to be like you're talking about the report that says, like Vicki was saying earlier and what Mike's talking about too, how much does it cost us to jail these people and the loss in work wages and production versus the money we're actually spending on trying to help the people. That's what's going to affect the people that don't have personal experience with it. But what's not being told, and you can't put in black and white, is the emotional damages and costs that people with mental health take away from the community. You can't put a dollar amount on that, and you can't put that on paper as how much emotional stress and problems do they cause in the community. You can't figure that. You can't put that down on paper. And so that's hard to relay to people if you were to put it to a vote, unless they have personal experience with people with mental issues.
I think that you're going to find that there are more people who have
I'm hoping.
have those types of experiences. I mean, if I said right now, raise your hand if you've had any experience with a family member, friend, neighbor, or whatever, who has suffered from mental illness, addiction, or loss of a family member or friend's life due to suicide. And you said, raise your hand, you would be amazed the number of people who might sheepishly put their hand up, because the fact remains that, what is it, 1 in 4, Keith? 1 in 4. So.
And that's what we got to hope for, is that there's enough support because of that.
Now, there is data from SAMHSA, too, that demonstrates the cost of not delivering behavioral health, mental health services. And so that's data that we need to research and find for our local community.
And we know how much the Guidance Center saves per year for keeping people in the community as opposed to the cost of hospitalization, what the difference is, and how much money is saved by the taxpayers because it doesn't happen. So when you want to bring it down to local, how much is saved locally?
Did you have something, Mr. Matthews?
No, I
But
was
you have- okay, all right.
with her request.
Oh, okay. All right, John,
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Okay. Are we clear in the direction we're going now? Clear enough?
You want the task force to continue to do work around fine-tuning the proposal for a proposed budget, or a proposed tax vote in the spring.
In the strategic plan.
It's part of the strategic plan, but also just continue to fine-tune mine data about local costs and local issues.
We can do that.
Any more questions, anybody?
Oh, thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Thanks. Amazing work.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate the
Kim.
opportunity.
And other members of the
And
task force.
thanks for everybody that worked on this and that took time out of your schedules today to be here today.
Well, some people have already left, but I see a couple people who did work on the task force. So if you could go, just stand up so that everybody else is gone. Where we go.
I think as the speed of government, I think this task force put together something pretty quick. Like I said, it's less than a year. Anyway. All right, thank you for all your work.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Ready for an executive? Yes, sir, Mr. Trower?
Did I get a letter from the board down there on what they're going to do on the road? So that I don't have to talk to everybody and brother on this.
We're going into executive.
Yes, sir.
We're going to send letters out. Hopefully it'll have the,
163rd, because they're all going to be calling.
Good, that's great.
Everybody will get one.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Maybe we'll put the phone number of the utility company on there so you can contact them.
Hey, we got your number.
We got it ready. So anyway, we ready to go to executive session? Oh, you didn't make public comment this morning, huh?
I made it. I'm here.
9 o'clock is the public comment.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
What?
I'll talk to you afterwards. We got to do an executive session right now.
Okay.
We'll be a few minutes. How many minutes do you think the executive session?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You could take this, gentleman, if you'd like.
Public comment.
I'm thinking 15 minutes, Commissioner.
Okay.
You want to go grab him, let him.
I'm just going to do all the time.
I move that the Board of County Commission recess for a closed executive meeting for the discussion of possible litigation as justified by KSA 75-4319B2 for consultation with legal counsel for the board, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client's relationship, and that the board resume open meeting at 11:15 in the board meeting room. Present in the executive meeting will be Commissioner Culbertson, KAAZ, Shemke, Smith, and Steben, Senior County Counselor David Van Paris, and County Administrator Mark Lothry.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the executive session? Voting?
Aye.
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 Let the record show that we returned from executive session. No decisions were made. Topic was limited to legal counsel on potential possible litigation. All right, we're back in regular session. Does anyone have anything else before we adjourn or go through what we've done in the last week? You got anything to report, Commissioner Stevens?
Probably do, but I can't think of anything right now.
Well, we have our planning and zoning meeting tonight at 5 o'clock prior to the regular planning and zoning meeting. Commissioner Shemke, you have anything? Okay.
Let it go.
All right.
I said I did United Way, and we're going to do the United Way kickoff here, so.
Okay. I'm sure you went to a meeting last night.
Yeah, City of Leavenworth was pretty short, but I do want to mention that since we talked about mental health today, I had talked to Paul Kramer about, Keith had mentioned before when I talked to him that Leavenworth City's HUD program is capable of paying the utilities on the mental health building, and they did not offer to do that when Keith asked them about it previously. So I asked Paul Kramer to look into that and see why Mary told Keith they won't pay their utilities when they can. And it's not a lot of money, but every little bit helps.
Sure.
And just one thing that came up last night at their meeting is the city is doing their activity on
Camp Leavenworth.
Camp Leavenworth next weekend, the 20th and the 21st.
Yeah.
And they're looking for volunteers, so if you're at all interested in volunteering for that, for the city, contact the city.
All right, well, I went to Emporia last Friday for the Northeast Kansas County Officials meeting and had a breakout session for commissioners. We all talk about all of our things that counties are going through, and it was kind of interesting because the week before, Commissioner KAAZ and Senior County Counselor and myself went to Manhattan to a legislative summit, and it was kind of same stuff. You know, everybody's experienced the same thing or concerns that we have. But we have, and then after the planning and zoning meeting night, I got to head to Bayshore City Council.
Was there, just a quick question, any action items defined at either of those?
Did you get the packet? Did you bring extra packets back from Manhattan?
I can give him, I gave him copies of any of the stuff I had, but I will see if there's anything else. But really, I think that David was to make contact, with Fort Drum?
I have been in contact with Jefferson County, New York, which is the host county for Fort Drum. Actually, there are 3 counties that comprise Fort Drum's territory. Their county administrator was very helpful. He's given me the contact information for their industrial agency for development or IED. They actually handle the pilot funding, which they do receive from Fort Drum, and I will be inquiring as to how that works out.
So that has to do with the in lieu of taxes things. And then I think that it was trying to get, we were supposed to be making contact with our individual state representatives to discuss our concerns regarding the demand transfer and all of those issues and kind of.
Commissioners, I would state that it's very important that your local legislature and your congressional representatives from the state be involved, because in response to the last inquiries the county made about the taxability of projects on Fort Leavenworth, state law was adopted and a federal law was adopted, basically blocking that action. So if that's going to be the end result, then we're
So we have to be willing to be very
heading down a very short road.
Well, so rather than be squeaky, one of the conversations I had is, what if, for example, the largest 10 counties in the state of Kansas were to somewhat come together and potentially threaten litigation?
Well, Commissioners, is this with respect to demand transfers or?
Yes, I mean, just.
City, county, highway.
Or all 105.
Yes to all, and not believing that being the squeaky wheel with local representatives will yield the same type of result.
Commissioners, the demand transfer was illustrated at the report Mr. Lockery prepared that I believe you have, is in the case of Leavenworth County in the millions of dollars, and it accrues.
25?
Yes.
And it accrues to a significance. The matter that you addressed this morning, quite frankly, would be easily funded if you had your demand transfers at the same level they were prior to 1996.
And I think Leavenworth County needs to initiate just that, exactly what you just said. I think if we initiated it and got the Big Ten or the 105 on the same page, then something would happen. So,
Initiate a lawsuit.
Initiate talks about.
Threaten of a lawsuit.
I think there are multiple issues, and one that's probably as big, if not bigger, than what we're talking about, that there has been some discussion about, like a
Yes.
joint lawsuit against the state. Everybody's always afraid to do that because they do carry a big stick, and there are other things they could do. And what do you really? But kind of like the school districts, at some point in time, they decided enough's enough. The only way we can do anything is through the judicial process, and that may happen. If that's what the board would like to do, I can certainly begin those discussions with some of the.
And I think that's why cooperation with the other counties is important.
And it would have to involve the cities too, because the cities
They're impacted.
are impacted sometimes more so than the counties even in some of these instances.
Well, I think if we had the support from those counties, and those counties were then empowered to work with their stakeholders and cities, find out if they have the same type of interest we do. Because otherwise, we'll be talking about the same thing next year and the year after.
I think that the meeting in November where the counties get together, the Kansas Association of Counties meeting in Wichita, that would be an excellent topic to bring up. And
I'm sure it will be.
Every other city and county I've talked to just need a catalyst.
Commissioner Shipke and I were in Junction City this past spring.
Every other county and city I've talked to so far just seem to need a catalyst to get this started. So.
I mean, Sedgwick's on board, Riley's on board. Unfortunately, some of the other Big Ten weren't in attendance, so we don't always see Johnson County. We don't.
Commissioners, if I could ask, what correspondence have you received from other counties bringing this topic up and proposing that action that Mr. Lawfrey just outlined to you?
None proposing that.
Someone has got to start it.
Exactly. That's my point.
And Commissioners,
I think we
you
need to
will
be a catalyst.
you will have the floor at that meeting in November. I think if you were to issue communications prior to that date, you might have company when you spoke about this.
Challenge accepted.
Okay, anything else?
Well, if we're going to have a work session about our legislative agenda, maybe we meet for an hour, or maybe we invite our legislators to join us the second hour and go over it.
Breakfast.
When is this conference?
Don't we have a breakfast where we do that?
In the middle of
It's the
November?
second week in November.
We do host a breakfast where
They
we
do
do
have-
exactly that thing, where
Well,
we
they do
communicate to
that
them. And the city does
January,
it, and so, I mean, there is.
Right before the session.
Yeah.
I'd like to get something hammered out sooner.
Let's invite
We
them
can
for
invite 'em.
breakfast.
Well,
Let's
maybe
have a
we move
breakfast
that
and invite them.
scheduled breakfast then up
We should
to
do that.
November, like maybe towards, you got to avoid Thanksgiving, obviously, but maybe towards the
Well, see,
middle
we
to
got-
end of November after we have our meeting.
Second week, maybe. I'd have to look.
So,
I can't remember anything this big being discussed at those breakfasts before either.
No.
well, we did talk about, I know 3 years ago, we talked about demand transfers because I was there. That was the first one I
Really?
attended. And we spoke about it, and
Didn't go anywhere.
then we heard some interesting comments about how wrong we were.
Yep. So that's why we need the other 104.
Did
Yeah.
you get the packet from Manhattan? We'll try to get you a copy of all that.
Okay.
This is basically a state statute.
I know. And they don't want to talk about it.
Anyways, all right, well, have anything else? Then we'll stand adjourned.